Ladies and gentlemen, we have an incredibly exciting one for you today because this is my favorite ITX case. This is the Meshlicious from a company called SSUPD. It's actually been since renamed to the Meshroom S. They've made it a little bit bigger, you can fit more things inside. But essentially, it's an ITX case that is pretty much at the limit of being able to put loads of hardware inside, but still being small enough to call it a proper ITX chassis. And it's worth noting that this is absolutely not a sequel. This is a completely different case, yet rather confusingly, it's almost exactly the same in terms of dimensions. But the main change actually with this particular chassis is that the orientation is now going for like a sit-down approach, a bit like the Coolermaster NR200P actually. So you won't be using a riser cable, you'll build it more like a traditional gaming PC, but you're not going to be compromising because you can still use up to a 280mm liquid all-in-one cooler, or you can even go custom, and you'll have something in a very, very small footprint and very small frame. And as you can tell, this is all mesh, so in terms of airflow, it's clearly never going to be as good as like a massive tower, but for ITX you can't really get much better than open frame. I mean, I suppose you could go full open frame, but that doesn't really count, does it? So let's see if this thing is any good, and let's build ourselves a pretty epic gaming PC that is among the most powerful you can build today, right after a short word from this video's sponsor. Corsair's IQ Link is here to revolutionize your gaming PC. This brand new ecosystem stops cable clutter in its tracks, with interconnecting components removing the need for endless cables and giving you more control over your PC than ever before. Grab some interlocking QX RGB fans for dual light loop beauty, an H150i IQ Link cooler for next level CPU thermals, and connect up to a whopping 14 devices to a single IQ system hub. Learn more today with the link down below. Right, let's strip this thing down and actually see what it's all about. The main differences between this and the Meshroom S is really down to what you can actually put inside it. Because interestingly, if you did want to go for something a little bit different, you can actually put up to an ATX motherboard inside the Meshroom S. I haven't personally done that because I know things will get incredibly tight, but it is pretty cool that you can do that. Whereas with this, you are a little bit more limited in that you can only go for an ITX motherboard unless you buy an optional accessory, and then you can extend it a little bit and go for micro ATX. That would be pretty cool, but obviously in a small chassis, personally speaking, I like to go for ITX just to give yourself more space for everything else, but it's all down to personal preference and what you actually need to put inside this. You can see we have some fan mounts here at the top. I think these are just 120s, and these are potentially going to be slim profile fans only. You can put a radiator on one of the sides, but here you can see you have this little bracket that can be removed. Again, it's going to depend on what you actually want to put inside. Whereas if we go around this side, you can see you have the back of the motherboard tray. Really not much room there at all, actually. I mean, there's literally none, so you're not going to be putting any cables round the back. Just the front pop off. Yes, just like that. Very easy to get inside this, actually. Completely toolless. Fractal could definitely learn a thing or two. It was just those initial screws at the back. And I think all of the screws around the side actually are just normal crossheads. So if you do want to take this apart further, you absolutely can. Whereas the back is actually like this little dust filter rather than anything solid. I'm not sure whether that really matters or not. Maybe it's just because this is going to be easier to clean, but it's worth noting. And yeah, as you can tell, this is a very light chassis once you take it apart. Very strong though. I mean, I wouldn't have to worry about sort of damaging it or anything. That's quite impressive actually. He says as something falls out. Let's not worry about that. Front panel I/O, we've got 3 USB ports. One is Type C to a Type A. I think the power button is actually around the back as well. It's not very obvious, but there's this little button right here. It's also nice to see that the I/O of your machine, if you use this in this particular orientation, will of course be at the back of the chassis. This is the main benefit of going for a layout like this, rather than the old way of having it face down or potentially face up, both of which aren't particularly great. But you can actually use this in a vertical orientation if you want to move the feet around. And they do also sell like a top cover accessory to neaten up your cables a little bit. But I don't know. I think it's going to be fine like this. But if you've got a very small space, or maybe using it in like a media center or something like that, and you want it to sit beside, I can see the appeal of this. Well, I really hope this isn't going to get tricky. Let's build it up and actually see how we get on, shall we? I've unfortunately picked a motherboard that I'm not a massive fan of. Not because there's anything wrong with this particular motherboard, it's just it is a bit of a faff to cable manage. This is the B650i Aorus from Gigabyte. It's just packing so many features that you need to use these different like cables and extensions and things. And the problem with that is that with ITX, it's already complicated enough. And when you have to start sort of stacking so much more on your motherboard because you can't physically fit it, obviously that is going to not necessarily cause you problems, but more cause you annoyance. I prefer a more bare bones one, like the one we used last week. It was from ASRock, the Phantom Gaming. Less features, but easier to use. And the CPU that we're going to be using today is one that I bought myself. I've been talking about this for ages. This is actually the first time I've put it in a rig. This is pretty much the best gaming CPU you can buy right now. It trades blows with the 13900KS, but it is way, way cheaper, uses less power, and in certain titles it will slightly outperform it as well. The main downside is that you do only have 8 cores, but I mean in a gaming PC, especially an ITX one, that kind of doesn't really matter, and the benefits of lower power draw in an ITX system is going to make so much more sense. When it comes to memory or RAM, this is pretty much topping it out when it comes to AMD. This is a 6000 megahertz kit. You can buy kits that are faster, and they will certainly work with some Intel motherboards and CPUs, but AMD doesn't really seem to like them at the moment. Maybe this is something that will change. Maybe it's future motherboards, future BIOS updates, future CPUs, but for the time being, I would stick with an Expo kit at 6000 megahertz. This is one from Kingston. I think this actually is XMP, but it should still work. We will need to take off the ginormous heatsink now to put the SSD in. But the one that we're using is the MP600 Pro XT from Corsair, 2 terabytes, PCI Gen 4. For gaming, don't worry about Gen 5, at least for now. Then we have to do the bit that I say is quite annoying, which is to plug these little cable and adapter things into the motherboard. You have this little drop-in card here. That's for your fans and your I/O, and then if you want to use USB, oh no, it's right here next to the SSD. Do you see what I mean? At least it's better if you do it now. Right, let's grab our chassis then, remove the radiator bracket that we will of course be using a little bit later, but if you are going to go for an air cooler, and you can actually fit a fair size one in here to be fair, then obviously you will not be needing this bracket at all unless you're going to be mounting any external fans. If this motherboard doesn't actually fit, that is going to be shocking. No, I'm not having this. I'm honestly not having that. Let's try taking it out for now, and let's try this again. Let's get this screwed down, and then let's see whether this cable will actually go in. I guess you could do it like that, but then is that going to clash with everything else? Let's take this opportunity then to start plugging some things in. It's only really the power switch for the front I/O and of course the USB. This is probably a good time to test graphics card compatibility, to be fair. So this is a 4080, obviously the same size as a 4090. Will this fit in? I mean, this is a brand new case. I think this is probably why this has been delayed for a while, to make sure it is compatible with everything. Yeah, there you go. That looks good. I mean, you're not going to have a ridiculous amount of room underneath it, obviously, because it's such a wide GPU. What about something even bigger, a 7900 XTX from TUF? No, that's not going to work. What about a 3080 Ti from Gigabyte? That fits in without problem. And you do have a little bit more room down the bottom now for the GPUs to breathe. So I'd say 2.5 slot is probably optimal. 3 will work. 3.5, it might physically fit, but that is definitely not going to be ideal. Right, but let's forget about GPUs for a second, because I think it's going to be far easier to put the power supply in next. So let's do that. This is from Seasonic. It is a 80 plus platinum power supply, so this is not going to be the cheapest one in the world by any stretch of the imagination. But the key thing here is that it is 750 watts, which is what we need for our 7900 XTX. Please don't underdo your power supply. You will regret it. And interestingly as well, actually, you can use an ATX power supply. So that's the full size one inside here if you so desire. I wouldn't actually recommend that though, because obviously it will take up more physical space, and this is not so good for cooling and cable management and actually fitting everything in. But then also something a lot of people don't realize is in terms of the cables, ATX cables are of course much longer, and this is a very small enclosure. So if you are going to use ATX, I would suggest getting some custom cables made that will be a lot shorter, or I don't know, getting hold of some, which is the same as what I just said. Do you like repetition? Do you like repetition? Do you like Anyway, the power supply should actually drop in fairly easily. I say drop in, it's going to be inverted if you like. It slots in this little slot at the back. I think you have to take the bracket out first actually. Then you screw it on with the standard PSU screws. This should then drop back into place, which I must confess is a little bit fiddly. I mean, all it needs is a little notch or something for it to rest in, so you don't have to hold it in place with one arm. Cool, right, power supply is in. Not enough to stop you buying it, but could be improved with a future revision. So then this cable needs to come through here, maybe like that. Yeah, and slot in the back. Yep, that looks good to me. And they have actually provided you with 2 different holes as well, which is nice, because depending on which way you want the fan, you can either have it this side where it's got completely full clean air, or if you want to use it as a bit more of an intake and exhaust for the rest of your system, you can of course have it facing the other way, and then that's when this hole would come in handy. Oh, and actually, to be fair, if you were using something like a 4080 or an Nvidia card that needs one of these high power adapters, you're going to have to make sure you do have an adapter for the adapter, or something right angle or something, so you can make sure you can actually plug it in, because you might get a little bit restricted with the height once you have that cable coming in, and obviously you don't want to bend it. We plug the rest of these cables in. Obviously SATA for the cooler, and PCIe will have to wait for the graphics card. Well, as predicted, it is starting to get a little bit messy now, but this was always going to be the case. I really should stop making that joke as we proceed to install the graphics card. And normally I'd be more excited about this, and obviously I am. It is the best bit of any gaming PC. The 7900 XTX is probably the graphics card I would buy for myself, assuming you could get it for a decent price, around about 900, 950 quid. If you can get it for that, go for it. But the question is, will it actually fit in comfortably around all of these cables? And to be fair, so far it's looking all right. Yeah, I like that. We've got a decent amount of room underneath as well, so I think ventilation for this should be as good as you can expect for a case like this, really. And then we've just got to make sure when we put the radiator down, we have the radiator side downwards rather than fan blades that will of course bunch all of this up. But you do want to have decent airflow in the first place, so it is going to make sense to sort of tie all of this down a little bit so we can actually get everything spick and span. Look at it, it's a mess. They always look like this. The NR200P was exactly the same, because it doesn't really matter, right? But you don't have anywhere really to stow them, and all the cables are short. I can make this look better, but you're not going to see it. But again, you've got literally nowhere to put them, because you don't need to put them anywhere. Right, here comes the bit I'm definitely not looking forward to, installing the all-in-one liquid cooler. I haven't used this one before. This is from Cooler Master. It is the PL240, so this is their Flux edition. It's one of their newest ones. And to be fair, Cooler Master coolers are usually pretty good, because the value is incredible. They're not necessarily always the best, but they can often be like half the price of the competition. It's silly, really. And as long as they do the job, does a few extra degrees really matter? I mean, you answer that. You tell me. Maybe it will. But I went for this today because I'm hoping that this is going to be relatively straightforward and simple to install, because I really don't want something that, you know, has loads of junction boxes and loads of different things to plug in. Corsair. Not that there's necessarily a problem with that normally, but in an ITX case, you want it to be as less complicated as possible. Yeah, the air cooler is definitely easier. And I think this is the main difference really between the Meshroom S and the Meshroom D. If you do want to use an all-in-one, it is actually pretty straightforward to use it in the S, but clearly this is certainly different, shall we say. So let's screw the bracket in, add some thermal paste to our 7800X3D, and then gently drop our CPU cooler into place. It should just hook over the little AMD brackets. We can now hook up all of these cables, so we've got the pump speed. We've then got the first of our RGB that we can plug in to the little splitter. And then comes the very last and probably the most complicated job, which is to actually fit this radiator. And you know what, actually, the silly thing with putting a radiator here is that you are going to have to move these cables entirely out of the way. Otherwise, you're going to be so restricted that this almost becomes a 120 or a 140 cooler, in which case you could have just used an air cooler and sort of saved yourself all of this faff in the first place, because there is actually quite a lot of room for a decent sized air cooler. I'm going to be very interested to see what the thermals on this chip are like. Bear in mind, it likes to be at 90 degrees anyway. I guess the next question is intake or exhaust. I'm going to go for an intake, because there isn't really any other fans inside this at all, and we do have obviously a lot of things inside that we do need to keep cool. But I can see the appeal of having like a slimline fan at the top here, actually, if you can fit that in, just to give yourself a little bit more ventilation with some exhaust. So screws in. Oh, the bracket. I'm not hating radiators just yet. I'm just mildly annoyed by them. I don't hate them, I don't hate them, I don't hate them. Oh, I kind of do though. I mean, to be fair, we also need to plug in these fan cables. So I am going to take it out again. One more go before we hate them. Oh my God, and you know what's going to happen as well. Oh, I've already foreseen it. I've already foreseen it. These screws are big. They're going to stick out. And our side panel is not going to like that one bit, is it? So you're going to need to use a different brand of cooler, or at least get yourself some different screws. I'll nick them from the Fractal cooler that I was actually going to use for this. I mean, it's not Cooler Master's fault. This is not designed for this case. Are they the same height though? Yeah. Fan screwed down. And then hopefully that is it. And we actually get two that is it moments. Will it work? First is, will the side panel go on? I've got a good feeling about this. I think it will. Yes, there we go. But let's box this back up completely. All side panels on. And then we have our completed Meshroom build. And I admit, I do not like picking that up because you almost want to push this bit in, but obviously it is just a dust filter. So I guess I know why they've done that, but just be careful. That is a very compact little case. I love the fact that you've got all of this ventilation on the side. It's just, as I say, it wasn't the easiest with an all-in-one, purely down to the fact that you are going to be risking bending some tubes, and obviously it's not the easiest to install either. But once you've built it, assuming it works, I think pretty spot on. So I think it's now time to test it. Okay, care package incoming, keyboard, mouse, PC Centric mouse mat, limited chance to get it. I don't know when it will sell out, but when it does, there are no more. Get yours today. Rightio then, moment of truth. Are we gonna get this working? Come on, come on. Yes! And of course we're going to do our thermal testing in just a second, but I will sort of wrap up this process really by saying that I am a fan of this case. I think it definitely does make sense if you want this sort of orientation. It is very similar to the Fractal Terra. The Fractal, let's be honest, was quite a lot easier to build in, but the main reason that was because we weren't really using a radiator, and frankly the motherboard was easier to work with as well. But I have to admit that at this moment in time, I genuinely have no idea how good or bad the thermals of this thing are going to be, because there's not really that much airflow for the GPU, but I think it will be enough. So let's get some games on this thing and find out. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are all set up and ready to go. I have this little Xbox controller, not to actually play games with, but to put this next to the PC, just to give you some scale for a second of how small this thing is. I am very pleased actually with the end result. I mean, building it could have been easier, but for what we had, I have to say I am pretty happy. And we will jump into some games, and we're going to start with Dead Space. This, of course, is the remake. In terms of settings, we are running this at 4K, 120 Hertz, and it says here we're using DLSS, but we're definitely not. I think this is a bug from where I last used this on an NVIDIA PC, because obviously that's not going to work. But besides being attacked, have a look at the top left-hand corner of your screen and you will see the thermal performance. And it's actually pretty good for what is a very small size chassis. I mean, what? A very small sized chassis. I think it is actually quite impressive. I mean, don't make the mistake that I made initially, which was to look at the GPU one 87 degrees and think that is the temperature. That is the hotspot temperature, which actually is surprisingly good, because I think these cards can get well over 90 degrees, and that's still by design with the hotspot. I mean, the actual GPU itself is around about 75 degrees, so I'd say that is pretty impressive. And we're also seeing the exact same on the 7800 X3D as well. So both the CPU and the GPU are running as you would expect. And bear in mind, we're not getting any form of stutter or anything notable in game, and everything is running flat out. I'd say that's a big win for the Meshroom. And I think at this stage we're going to swap across now to some Apex Legends, but just to give ourselves a little bit of a change, let's see what happens if we turn this on its side in the more vertical orientation and see if that changes the thermals at all. And here we are, jumping out of the jet at 4K resolution, max settings apart from the usual sunspot shadows that's set to very high, not ultimate, and here we are. I mean, this actually looks a lot worse now. We seem to have gone up in terms of thermals. We're now 110 degrees on the hotspot, and I think that is the hard limit for what they actually want. So I think by not having any feet on the underside, we've now got less airflow coming in, and clearly this is not working out. I mean, we were running at 100% GPU a second ago, so I'm actually very surprised that there's that much difference, but clearly there's just not really anywhere for the air to go at the moment. So I will see if we can rescue this by turning it on its side. But clearly whatever happened before wasn't right. Something was off there. Maybe it was just the orientation of the GPU. Maybe the graphics card doesn't work properly that way. Maybe there's like a heat pipe or something within the card that likes to be in this orientation. Let's test this theory though by letting it bed in for another 3 or 4 minutes before we actually draw up our conclusions. I mean, we are getting 144 FPS at basically max settings at 4K resolution, no upscaling or anything. That's pretty dandy. There is actually a frame rate cap on this game as well that obviously you can remove, but I mean, yeah, 144 FPS with about 75-80% GPU utilization. So what, you could probably get about 160 or so if you take that cap off. This is a very powerful PC despite the footprint. So Meshroom D, in summary then, the main difference really between this and the S is all about the form factor. This is basically just a mini NR200p. That is the easiest way of describing it. I think the NR200p is probably slightly better if you're going to go for this approach, because you've just got a little bit more room in there to put the radiator on the side. But obviously if you're going for ITX, people want small, and clearly this does work, right? You can do it, there's not a problem. Thermals aren't the absolute best, but there's not really anything wrong with them. It's not going to hinder you, especially if you're going to go for lower power components. But I really can't help but think that if I was going to build this myself, as we've mentioned loads of times already in this video, I do think that the Meshroom S is probably better for this sort of approach, purely just because you can put that all in one on the front and then it just gives you more room to fit everything else. But having said that, there is a big advantage of going for this, or two main advantages really, mainly in that you don't have to use a PCI riser cable, and that does have two advantages. First one is price. This comes in at $110. That's quite a lot less than the Meshroom S if you don't already have a riser cable you want to use. And obviously the benefit of not having to use a riser is the fact that if you are going to go for a PCI Gen 5 board, then you can use that natively. You've not got to have to worry about upgrading that in the future as well. Everything is just sort of drop in and ready to go. So as long as you're okay with the limitations, really just being thermals, but then also needing like right angle connectors if you're going to use one of the NVIDIA cards, I think this is a case I can highly recommend. Just do yourself a little bit of research between this and the S to make sure you're getting the right one for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, please smash the like button and get yourself subscribed, and maybe check out the PC Centric mouse mat linked down below. Or if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that has been featured in this video, you can also find that linked down below. And of course, while you're down there, why not bask in the beauty of Corsair's new iCUE Link? This smart ecosystem eliminates those pesky RGB and fan cables from your system, allowing you to stack RGB devices with a smile. All the devices can be automatically set up and configured in iCUE with some exclusive effects, and the new QX RGB fans even have a temperature sensor inside them for monitoring air temps. Get yours today with the link down below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.